Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Firebase Semi-live. So if you've been following along, we have created our version of Friendly Eats that looks very similar to the official sample version, except now, if you go ahead and look in our database, we have a users collection with a document that is equal to our user ID with right now like some last login time. And this premium status thing I'm just going to delete because that was just for demonstration purposes. And then we also talked about, if you'll recall from our keynote, this last slide here, we talked about our strategy, which was like, hey, you know what? We're going to go ahead and create a favorites array that's going to have sort of basically going to have a few values that are equal to the ID of some restaurant documents. We're going to have a Cloud function go ahead, grab those restaurants, smash them all together, and send those results back up to our client. Let's go ahead and start doing some of that now. First thing we need to do is actually create an array that is equal to a list of our users' favorite documents. And I guess eventually we should probably put that into our code, into our UI, to go ahead and sort of set that element to our array. For now, I'm going to fake it because, that's how we do. So I'm basically going to pick a couple of restaurants that I think would make sort of good fake favorite restaurants and just sort of create an array that's equal to those values. I find when I'm doing this, because all these restaurants kind of start to look the same, we got drive-through spot and fire drive-through. They all have very similar names. I like to pick a couple that have similar pictures. So I'm going to pick these two with the macarons. And what I'm going to do is basically, if you recall, in our update user info, we're creating this user data object with the last login time. I'm now just going to go ahead and create, in addition to this, a favorites array. Favorites, and that is equal to an array. There we go. And the array of these values, I'm basically going to sort of copy and paste these restaurant IDs from the URL here. So we've got that one and this one. Obviously, these IDs are going to be different for your own app. Just go ahead and copy whatever IDs you want to make your favorite restaurants. So I'm going to save this. And if I just go ahead and reload this page again, hopefully, yes, you can now see I now have a favorites array with these two restaurant IDs listed as my favorites. So we've got our fake data set up. Let's see what we can do to start viewing it. I guess first things first, we probably need to add a button. So let's add a button. Yee! I'm going to go over into our index.html here. Now you'll notice as we're sort of scrolling through some of this stuff, you got a lot of things that are like class MDC toolbar section and, material icons, NBC toolbar __ icon -- menu, some stuff like that. And again, if you're not from like the web world, you might be like, what the heck is all this stuff? Basically, we're using a library called material components for the web to, I guess, oversimplify it a bit. It's a library that's using like some JavaScript and some CSS. I think you can see, where do we load it up? Got it here. Basically, what happens is when you assign certain classes to like, a span or a section, it's going to go ahead and do all the heavy lifting of sort of making it look appropriately stylized and, work in all the right formats and do some magic here for you. For instance, see how like I've got all my data in like 3 columns, 3 rows. And then if I go ahead and shrink this down a little bit, it sort of nicely expands. Then it says, you know what? I can't fit 3 columns in here. I'm going to make it 2 columns. Like that's all just kind of material design doing all that work for me. I didn't have to do any of that, which is great. So we're going to go ahead and keep doing that for a button. But that just means now we sort of have to make sure that our button is also using all this, material design component-y stuff. All right, so we've got, where's the best place? So right here, you can see this is our header. And it looks like here we've got a icon that represents our restaurant. And this is that, the actual title here that says Friendly Eats. Maybe over on the right-hand side here, we'll add our favorites. So I'm going to go ahead and basically just kind of, I think I can just copy and paste this section. And I'm going to remove this title because we don't need that. And let's see. Instead of having this as a line start, we're going to make this as a line end. And the other thing we're going to do is instead of restaurant and you know what? Let's just go ahead and look at material, there we are, material.io resources icons. If you're ever not sure like what to do, like for instance, I believe restaurant. Yeah, there's restaurant. And I think favorites, yeah, favorite. You can go ahead and kind of just look up the name of any icon that you want. And basically, I'm going to go, if I just go ahead and say, hey, this thing that is class material icons, if I change that to favorite, if I go ahead and reload that, I now have a thing that looks like, yay, a little heart. So this is good, except I guess we probably need to make it clickable. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let's see here. Instead of MDC toolbar icon, this actually is going to be, let's see if I got my notes here, MDC icon button. Now if I reload that, well, it's a little bigger, but I also need to change this from being a span to a button. And I think, whoops, maybe the problem is, there you go, MDC icon button. Let me go ahead and reload that. And when I have this thing, you'll notice it has like a little hover state. And when I click it, it's got a little bit of a kind of, clickable animation going on. So that's a pretty good start. All right, the other thing I think I'm going to do here is I have noticed that like a lot of our elements sometimes have like ARIA labels, which is basically just an accessibility thing so that, if you can't see what's going on the screen, this can just sort of provide an alternate label. I actually think favorite is probably the default that it'll grab, but I'm just going to call it my favorites just to be. This is optional, but always good to kind of consider accessibility when you're designing your apps. And my app looks exactly the same as before, which is good. But I got my button, looks a little off center. Not quite sure why that is. Here, let's go ahead and inspect it. And we can kind of see, here's like my, oh, come on. There we go. Basically, you can kind of see like here's where it's sort of decided what all of the CSS styles are going to be applied to it. Looks like material icons, we have defined that as having a font size of 36. I bet you that's what's doing it. Like if we change that to, yeah, like 24. Hey, look at that. Now it's sort of nicely aligned, which I suppose that's one way of fixing it. But now it looks kind of small compared to our other buttons. Let's go back to, that was 36, right? Yeah. Maybe what I will do is let's fix that padding. Maybe it's the padding that's the problem. What if that were like 6 instead of 12? Well, that looks better. All right. And by the way, you'll notice that like when you do that, the Chrome Developer Console will go ahead and sort of tell you, hey, this is what your style now looks like in your button class. So I could actually just go ahead and like copy and paste this and put it right into my text. So I'm going to do that. So here I'm just going to put style equals, and I could do all this, although I think, can I just simplify that with padding? Like, let's just make this padding, and that will sort of include everything. Again, like, hey, serious web developers, if I'm doing something crazy here, let me know. But I think that should probably do it. So let me go ahead and reload this. And now, hey, we've got a button with our padding of 6. It looks a little nicer formatted. So, yay, we've added a button. How much time? Are we out of time?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Whew, half a video to add a button. But it's OK. We're going to keep going and have the button do something when you click on it. So, fantastic. Let's go. What's the best way to do this for now? So, view list is the, basically, this is the function that in our friendly eats.view script kind of does most of the work of like rendering out a list of restaurants. It's sort of what's powering this screen here. And so maybe this is the place where you can just add like a simple on-click handler that will basically say, hey, you know what, let's go ahead and like, add a function to that favorites button. Let me go back to my button here and add a little ID. equals favorites button. Can't type today. There we go. It's you watching me. You're making me nervous. All right, view. So our header L is sort of our header element. I'm just going to go ahead and maybe this is kind of a quick and dirty thing, but we're going to kind of query selector favorites button. And we'll add event listener click that will have a function. And we will console.log. All right. Let's look at your favorites. Cool. Oh, hey, why is this giving me an error? Because, look at that, quotes. In the JavaScripty world, there's different ways of doing quotes. You can have single quotes, and you can have double quotes. And, you know, I don't know, it's probably like a tabs versus spaces thing where some people have very strong opinions. I think, honestly, it doesn't really matter. As long as you kind of pick one style and make sure it's consistent with everything else in the document. And it does look like everywhere else in the document, we've gone ahead and gone single quotes. And so basically, this is, I think, sort of the ESLinter telling me like, hey, you've defined at some point in your preferences that all your quotes should be single quotes, and then you've gone and added in double quotes. And while it's not exactly wrong, it's also not consistent with the rest of the document. And so let's be consistent. I think if I just go ahead and say, hey, fix this quotes problem for me, it'll go ahead and fix it for me, which is nice. I think that's VS Code that's doing that. Very helpful. And it's gone ahead and escaped that little single apostrophe. So, hooray. Now we'll go ahead, run this again. I will click this button. And in our console, it's now telling me that it's going to go ahead and look at our favorites. Let's start building the Cloud function that's going to go ahead and do all of this. How are we doing on time? 12 minutes. All right, you know what? We got just enough to maybe probably do the equivalent of hello world in a Cloud function. Should I even look at the documentation? Cloud functions, get started. All right, we've gone ahead and added a project. We've got our Firebase ID. All that's good. We've gone ahead and npm installed -g to Firebase tools. Again, do make sure that you have done this because as I might have mentioned in the first video, these tools, particularly when we get into using sort of the emulator, are getting updated fairly rapidly. And there were a few bugs I ran into that got fixed just by sort of making sure I had the latest version of Firebase tools. Go ahead and make sure you have done that. And then I'm going to go ahead and let's Command Z here, Control Z. Let's go ahead and say, let's say do Firebase init functions. This command is essentially going to set up the sort of the framework for Cloud Functions for Firebase within my Firebase project. So I'll do that. It's going to say, hey, what project do you want to use? I will say, use an existing project. And it's using Semi-live Cloud Functions because that's the one that it knows is already running. I want to pick TypeScript. Basically, TypeScript you can kind of think of as like a strongly typed version of JavaScript. I'm sure that the TypeScript people are mad at me for using that overly simplified definition, but that's kind of what it is. It's really nice. I do recommend using it when you're writing your Cloud Functions. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Do you want to use tslint to catch probable bugs? Sure. Do you want to install dependencies with npm now? Let's say yes. And I think this should probably install everything we need. But let's just find out. I know the one thing that they do ask you to do is sort of within your functions folder. So I'm going to go into functions here. Let's go ahead and install Firebase Functions latest and Firebase admin latest. I'm guessing that's probably exactly what it just did. But just in case, go ahead and do that. Actually, it probably didn't. So you want sort of a fairly up-to-date version of Firebase Functions and Firebase admin. Firebase admin is going to be sort of the SDK that is going to be talking to Cloud Firestore directly. You need both of these pretty much for any decent Cloud Functions for Firebase implementation. So we've gotten those. Looks like I've got a pretty up-to-date version. And gee, we might have done everything we need to do to get set up. So let's jump over into VS Code, and we'll notice we now have a new directory called functions. In here, we got a whole bunch of stuff. Probably the important thing that we're going to be mostly dealing with is under source, index.ts. This is where we're going to be writing most of our code for implementing our cloud functions for Firebase. I'm going to start by just going ahead and uncommenting this hello world function. What this is doing is basically, this is a function that is this HTTPS. Should I back up a little bit? Cloud functions, real quick. They, in general, respond to different events that happen within your application, like a document gets created, or a user account is created, or an analytics conversion event has been fired, that kind of thing. However, there's also a couple other different cloud functions that respond to other events. One, there's now a new one that sort of responds to like pub subs, which is sort of like a generic message passing feature supported by Google Cloud. But then also this HTTPS on request, which basically allows a cloud function to respond to a direct HTTP request like it were any sort of web page. And so that's what's happening here is I'm basically creating a function called hello world that says, I'm going to basically call this function directly from my browser. And what you're going to do is you're going to send hello from Firebase. So we can go ahead and deploy this by calling Firebase deploy -- only functions. And it would probably help if I spelled Firebase correctly. There we go. And it's going to go ahead and think for a little bit. It's going to go ahead and sort of build my functions. It's going to go ahead and deploy them out onto the world. The first time always takes a little longer. Oh, now there's some awkward silence. First time deploy always takes long. It's not always this bad. But you'll kind of see why you're probably not even listening to this. You've probably double-clicked to fast forward 10 seconds and waiting for this thing to finish up. But if you are sticking around, I appreciate that. But you'll sort of see this deploy process can be a little time consuming even once sort of it's faster on future iterations, which is why I'm going to show you how to run it locally. But first, yay, there's our first deploy. All right, and this actually tells us, oh, this hello world thing, this is where you can run it from. So let's copy this, open up a new browser. I'm going to call this, and I get hello from Firebase. Yay, so my functions are working. And if I were to change this again, hello world from Firebase, I could, now deploy this again, and we'd have to sit here and listen to me talk to Dustin about his weekend again. But maybe you don't want that. And maybe you don't want that to happen every time you're trying a new thing to fix some syntax error or whatever. And so that's why we like running, at least I like running these things in an emulator. So what we need to do is get our emulator suite up and running so that we can actually sort of develop locally. Our emulator suite, basically when you run it, for this project, it's going to sort of run all three of our services locally. It will run it'll run Firebase hosting locally, and that we've essentially already been doing when we called Firebase serve. It's also going to run our functions locally, and it's going to run Cloud Firestore instance locally, and our functions and everything are going to talk to that Cloud Firestore instance that's running locally. At least it should if I've done everything right. Now, this is great because it sort of lets you do a bunch of really quick testing, like you can unit test your security rules by doing all this locally. You can, again, sort of security or unit test cloud functions, and you can test them maybe against sort of a local version of your database so that, if you've got a function that's supposed to do something really kind of complex and is going to go around and denormalize your data, maybe you want to test that locally before you go ahead and sort of put that on your live production environment. And most important, you get really nice fast turnaround. Now, to get the emulator suite running, you need the latest version of Java, or you need a pretty recent version of Java. And it looks like I have, at some point, I got Java 11. Runtime environment 18.9. I don't know actually what version you need. I just know our documentation says hey, you need the latest version of Java. And let's see, Firestore emulator, Firebase emulator. Right, this just says like the latest version of Java and Node.js. This is the one I got. I don't know if you need the full JDK or you probably just need the Java runtime environment. If you got it running, let me know what version of Java you had and if it worked or if you needed to update, because I'm not so sure myself. I just know I grabbed the latest version, or I grabbed a fairly recent version. It looks like I have 11.04, so maybe not 13, but 11.04. And that seems to be good enough for me to run. Hopefully you can sort of run something very similar. And so now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to make sure I quit my local Firebase server. That was still, suspended in the background. And now I am going to type Firebase emulators : start. And gee, that was fast. All right, so basically what it said is, okay, my functions emulator is running on localhost, port 5001. Firestore is running on port 8080, and it's saying, hey, how it used to run on 8081? Well, don't do that anymore. And my hosting, once again, is running on localhost 5000. So what does all that mean? Well, it means now you'll notice that it's saying, hey, remember that hello world function? Now, instead of having to run off of US Central 1 Semi-live cloud.cloudfunctions.net, I just run it off of localhost 5001. So once again, it says hello from Firebase. And you're like, wait a minute, didn't you just change it to hello world from Firebase? Yes. This is the one thing that is a little different when you're running, when you're sort of using TypeScript and running locally. When you deploy your functions, Cloud Firestore or Cloud Functions for Firebase does this one intermediate step where it sort of compiles your TypeScript functions into JavaScript, which then get deployed. That doesn't happen here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new window and go to Developer, Web, the Semi-live, Quick Start, Firestore, go into my functions directory, and call npm run build. And what this is going to do is it's going to run a script that basically looks at my TypeScript function, actually compiles it. You can kind of see where it compiles it to is under lib. There's this new function called index.js. You'll notice this is the JavaScript, essentially compiled version of TypeScript. And look at that. It now has hello world from Firebase, which is what I had. So in fact, if I say hello everybody from Firebase, I can go ahead and call npm run build. You'll notice that's now been updated here. And if I go ahead and reload my cloud function that's running locally, it now says hello everybody from Firebase. I think that's actually a pretty good stopping point. So we have gotten to a point now where we have a cloud function that we're running. We're able to call it locally because we've gotten the emulator up and running. And now you can kind of see, like, in order to change that and try it again, I just had to run this npm run build script, which took like 5 seconds. And this is going to make development a whole lot easier when we start developing our cloud functions for real. And hey, you know what? We'll do that in our next video. So I will see you in a few more days or however long it takes them to put these together. All right, thanks everybody.